It was a simple message, nothing too flowery, nothing too emotional. Just a text from my sister that read, "Hey, BBQ for Caleb's birthday next Saturday. Come if you're free, oh, and come simple. Okay, don't overdress like last time." At first glance, it could pass for casual, maybe even friendly. But I knew better. It was the tone, that carefully veiled dig. That soft insult tucked in like a garnish, "Don't overdress like last time." As if I had walked into her last event in a ball gown and tiara, when in reality, I'd just worn a neat jumpsuit and a pair of heels. But in her world, anything that looked to put together was considered showing off. And I'd been guilty of that all my life, apparently. Still, I stared at the message longer than I should have. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I did. I could say no. I could ignore it, claim I had a flight scheduled or a work commitment, but I knew she'd roll her eyes and tell our mom, who then called me asking why I always acted like I was too good for family. It was always that, a balancing act between not showing up and being accused of arrogance, or showing up and being humiliated. I replied, "Sure, I'll be there." I didn't add a smiley face. Didn't ask what I could bring, just confirmation. That was my first mistake, thinking that staying silent would somehow protect me. The days leading up to the party were busy, as usual. I had a red-eye flight from Sao Paulo to New York, then another charter to a private island off the coast of Belize. I barely had time to breathe, let alone think about my sister's passive-aggressive tone. But at night, lying in my hotel room, I kept replaying that message. The way she always made me feel like I was the weird one, the outsider. It had been that way since we were kids. She was the golden girl, straight hair, cheer captain, good grades, early marriage. I was a quiet one with grease on my hands, from building toy engines and stacks of aviation books by my bed. She was the girl in the family album with a tiara. I was the girl in the background holding a wrench. Now, as adults, nothing had changed, at least not in her eyes. She still saw me as the awkward sister with strange hobbies, the one who never really settled down. She once told a cousin that I probably lived out of a suitcase because I had commitment issues. I didn't correct her, let her think what she wanted. But the truth was different, very different. Saturday came faster than expected. I landed at the local airstrip in the early morning, traded my uniform for jeans and a plain navy shirt, nothing fancy. I pulled my hair into a low bun, no makeup, just a bit of gloss. I took a deep breath before entering the backyard gate. My mother was already there, greeting me with the same half-smile she always wore. The one that said she was happy I came but unsure how long she could defend me. "You made it," she said, hugging me stiffly. "Your sister's inside setting the table." "Great," I answered, trying to keep the dread out of my voice. The backyard was filled with balloons and folding tables, the smell of grilled meat and plastic cutlery mixing in the hot summer air. I spotted some of the uncles and aunts, old neighbors, church friends, everyone smiling, chatting and staring. A few nodded at me, others did that thing, the full-body scan, trying to assess whether I looked normal or too much. One woman whispered something to her husband, who chuckled. I could already tell I was being discussed. Then I saw her. My sister, Collie. She was in a peach sundress, barefoot, holding a pair of tongs like she was queen of the barbecue. She spotted me, narrowed her eyes, then faked a big smile and walked over. "Anna, you came," she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek, then stepping back like I might smear something on her. "You said it was Caleb's birthday." "Of course I'd come," I replied. She gave a tight laugh. "Well, I was worried. You're always flying around. Never know if you're in Greece or Guatemala." Then she leaned in slightly and added, "At least you didn't show up in heels this time. We might survive the grass." And there it was, the jab, public, immediate, delivered with that practice smirk she perfected since high school. I wanted to say something, to remind her that I'd been up in the sky for 20 hours straight and still made it to her backyard with a gift in hand, but I bit my tongue. "I brought Caleb a little something," I said instead, handing over a wrapped box. "Hope he likes it." "No, I'm sure he will. He loves anything shiny that makes noise," she quipped, then turned back to the grill, dismissing me like I was a side character in her story. I wandered to the edge of the patio, clutching a lemonade and watching the kids run circles in the yard. Caleb spotted me and ran over, hugging my legs. He was only 6, bright-eyed and innocent, untouched by all the ego and pride floating around. The adults, "Hi Auntie Anna, did you bring your plane?" he asked. I laughed. "Not today, kiddo. I left it at the airport." He nodded solemnly as if that made perfect sense and ran off again. I didn't realize then that his little mind had just planted the first domino. That the simple truth he carried, something he must have overheard in one of his mom's rants, would soon become the detonator for everything that was about to unfold. But standing there, alone with my plastic cup and my chewed lip, I just felt like I always did at these things. Like the odd one out, the wrong shape in the family puzzle. The one everyone tolerated but never really wanted if only they knew. And they were about to. Growing up, I was always that girl. The one who collected maps instead of makeup. Who asked for airplane models for Christmas instead of dolls, at every family event. While the other kids played tag or staged little dances for the adults. I sat quietly in a corner with my nose in an aviation magazine I picked up from a yard sale. Nobody really asked about them, they just nodded, chuckled awkwardly and said Anna's unique. My sister, on the other hand, was the family's crown jewel. Collie was everything a suburban household could want in a daughter: blonde, curls, a pageant smile, and a knack for always knowing exactly what to say in front of adults, even when she didn't mean it. She got straight A's, danced ballet, wore bows, and eventually married the nice guy from the local bank. Their wedding was so pastel and perfect it looked like a Pinterest board vomited on a vineyard. I wasn't invited to the rehearsal dinner, apparently. They weren't sure I'd be able to get time off from my travels. That's what they called it. Travels. Like I was a backpacker floating from couch to couch, chasing sunsets. In truth, I was already a commercial pilot by then. And not just any pilot. One of the youngest to complete a full international route training with my airline. I'd flown through weather that would terrify most people into quitting their job. I'd landed private jets on icy mountain runways, and coordinated landings while handling engine alerts midair. But all they saw was someone who couldn't be pinned down. Someone who didn't post baby photos or engagement rings or milestone parties. So to them, I must have been lost, a drifter. That confused traveler narrative gave them comfort. It made Collie feel secure. It allowed her to toss comments like, Anna's still in her find yourself phase, without having to confront the reality that maybe, just maybe, I found myself a long time ago. And what I found didn't need their applause. But no matter how successful I became, how many hours I logged in the sky, I never brought any of it home. Not because I was ashamed, because I was tired of explaining myself, tired of justifying the life I chose, a life that didn't involve PTA meetings or matching family pajamas. When I tried once, my mom had blinked and said, "But when are you going to settle down and get a real job?" So I stopped trying. I smiled politely, mailed birthday cards, showed up when invited, though rarely invited first, and listened. As they told stories about their normal lives, my name came up in those stories too. Usually as a punchline. Anna probably flew over that city last week, they'd say, laughing. She's too busy for us. I wasn't too busy. I was just tired of being made to feel like I had to apologize for not being like them. And that brings me back to the backyard. The birthday barbecue, where plastic forks snapped on overcooked meat and gossip ran hotter than the grill. I had barely been there an hour when it started again. The little jabs, the not-so-subtle comparisons, Collie talking about how hard it was balancing her kids, the dog, her new workout plan, and still being the only one in the family with a reliable routine. Everyone nodded in admiration. Someone asked where I live these days. And before I could open my mouth, Collie jumped in and said, Anna, oh, she's probably on another yoga retreat in Bali. Or was it Budapest this time? Another laugh. I smiled, sipped my lemonade and kept my mouth shut because what would have been the point if I had said I'd just landed from Geneva after piloting a multi-million-dollar aircraft for a board of European investors? They would have blinked and said, oh, so? You're like a stewardess, not that there's anything wrong with that. But I'm not. What hurts more than being mocked is being deliberately misunderstood, and yet, I was used to it. I learned to expect the eye rolls, the raised eyebrows. I'd grown a thick skin over the years, but sometimes, just sometimes, it still itched. Like a wound that never quite heals because someone always manages to scratch it open again. And today, they were scratching hard. Do you even have a home? One of the uncles asked, half laughing, like a place with furniture and a sink and stuff. Collie added, she probably lives in the plane, right? Hanging a hammock in the cockpit. More laughter. I looked down at my paper plate, now mostly empty, my food cold. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt, really, just numb, like when you hear the same joke for the 100th time, and it no longer even deserves a groan. I was about to excuse myself, maybe hide in the kitchen for a bit, when I heard a tiny voice, louder than it should have been, cut through the laughter. Like a blade, my mommy said she flies a jet. Silence, you know that split second in a movie when the record scratches and everyone freezes? That's exactly what happened. The table went dead quiet, heads turned. Collie, who had just taken a sip of wine, choked. Caleb, her son, the birthday boy, was standing with a juice box in one hand and his other hand pointing directly at me. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. He was proud. She flies a jet, he repeated. A little softer this time, but still clear. All eyes landed On me. And for the first time, I didn't look away. There was a pause, long enough to feel like the world had stopped spinning. Every fork midair, every drink halfway to the lips, every half-formed sentence suddenly suspended. I watched my sister freeze. Kali's smile, the one she wore like a shield of superiority, flickered just for a second, but I saw it, the panic, the discomfort, like a glitch in her performance, and then she recovered, of course. She always recovered. That was her specialty. She let out a nervous little laugh and waved her hand dismissively, like her son had confused me with a character in a bedtime story. Oh honey, she's just joking. Right, Anna? He's always making up things, this one. Crazy imagination. She nudged Caleb gently, but her eyes darted toward me, sharp with a silent command, play along. But I didn't, not this time. I set my lemonade down slowly and looked at Caleb. You're right, I said, simply. I do fly the jet. My voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It cut through the air like a thread pulled tight. That's my job. More silence. Then a sudden clatter as someone dropped a fork. My Uncle Henry, the one who'd always teased me about floating around the world like a ghost, stared at me, brows raised. My mom's expression morphed from mild annoyance to blank confusion. But it was my sister's husband, Ryan, who reacted most strongly. He sat up straighter, eyes narrowing. Wait, you're a pilot? I nodded. Yes, for who? I'm a corporate pilot, I answered calmly. Private jets. Mostly international routes. Geneva, Singapore, Sao Paulo. Last month, I reached into my small crossbody bag, the same one Kali had joked about looking like a fanny pack for tourists, and pulled out my ID, my aviation license, my current airline's crew badge. I placed them gently on the table. Ryan leaned forward and picked them up. His fingers gripped the edges tighter than necessary. And when he read the name, his face went pale. Holy, he whispered, you're Anna L. Avery. We flew with you last quarter. That name, my full name. The one printed in neat black ink on every flight roster. The one that had earned me respect in boardrooms, on runways, in hangars across 3 continents. But never around this table. Never at home. Yeah, I said, that was me. My mother's voice cracked through the thick tension. Wait, what do you mean you flew with her? Ryan cleared his throat and set the ID down gently, like it was suddenly fragile. My boss charters a Gulfstream. Anna was the lead pilot. She landed in heavy fog like it was nothing. Our VP couldn't stop talking about her skill. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just sat there and watched my sister's face unravel in real time. She tried to maintain composure, but her lips twitched. Her pride had just taken a direct hit from her own son. No less. I didn't know, she muttered, staring at her plate like it had betrayed her. No one ever asked, I replied, as gently as I could. That was the truth, wasn't it? No one asked because they'd already decided who I was, a drifter, an embarrassment, an oddity. It was easier for them to keep me in a box they built years ago. One labeled failure in disguise. I could have left it at that. Let the silence do the rest. But something inside me, maybe the younger version of me who used to beg for their approval, wanted to be clear. Not proud, not arrogant, just clear. I worked hard for this, I said. I wasn't handed anything. I did the training. I logged the hours. I passed exams that most people fail. And I chose this path because it made me feel alive. Not because I wanted to impress anyone. Kali blinked quickly, like she wanted to cry but wouldn't dare. She had the kind of pride that didn't allow public emotion, only passive aggression disguised as laughter. I didn't mean, she started, I know. I interrupted softly. But it doesn't change what you said. The kids were still watching, especially Caleb, whose little eyes started between us with curiosity and something else, admiration, maybe. For a moment, I wondered what it meant to him, what it meant to see an adult woman being recognized for what she actually was, not what others assumed. And then I heard him whisper, mostly to himself, that's so cool. It broke something in me, something brittle and buried. I smiled. Thanks, kiddo. Across the table, my aunt shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Why didn't you ever tell us? I gave her a look I hoped she'd understand. Would you have listened? No one answered that. Not because they didn't know the answer, but because they did. And that silence was all I needed. I think it's poetic in a way. How the moment everything unraveled started with something so small. A tiny silver fork. Caleb's fingers were too short to hold it properly, too clumsy to scoop the little bites of mashed potatoes his mother had arranged just so on his plate. He tipped it, knocked over his juice, and in the tiny chaos that followed, a few napkins, a flurry of sighs, my quiet chuckle, something shifted. I bent down to help him. It was instinctive, not just because I loved the kid, but because bending down, blending in, had always been the safe thing, the invisible position, the support role, the one I was used to playing in this family. As I patted his shirt dry and laughed off his apology, He looked at me with wide, adoring eyes. The same eyes that had once looked at his mother like she was the entire sky. And then, with the innocence only a child could pull off, he pointed at me and said, clear as day, "She flies a jet." Mommy told Daddy she does. The whole table froze. I mean froze. Like a glass shattering in a silent room. No wind, no background music, no clinking of silverware. Just stillness. My hand stopped mid-motion. My eyes lifted, meeting Kali's instantly. She didn't even blink. It was a microsecond. A twitch in her jaw, a flash of fear she didn't have time to mask. Then, her expression twisted into a laugh, brittle and forced. Like it belonged to someone in a sitcom realizing the joke had landed wrong. "He doesn't mean that," she said quickly, a little too loudly. "You know how kids are, always making stuff up." Caleb looked confused. "But you said that's enough, sweetie." She cut him off. Her voice clipped. I stood slowly, dusting off my knees, suddenly very aware that all eyes were on me. My uncle with his narrowed stare. My aunt half frozen with a forkful of chicken. My mother already preparing to scold Caleb for starting trouble. And my father quietly fuming like he used to when I brought home a trophy he hadn't approved of. "He's not wrong," I said simply. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I pulled my ID badge from my purse. The same badge I kept on me during flights. I placed it gently on the table. "I do fly jets. That's my job." Someone gasped. I don't even know who. But I heard it. Kali was pale now. Her mouth moved. But no sound came out. Ryan, her husband, leaned forward. "Wait, you're a pilot? For real?" I nodded. "For real." His face turned serious. "What do you fly?" "Gulfstream G650. Mostly," I said, casually. "Sometimes a Falcon 7X, depends on the client." The air changed just like that. The small room, which minutes ago had been thick with judgment and performative family cheer, was now too quiet, like everyone was recalibrating reality. My mother pressed her lips together in a tight line. My father looked away. But it was Kali's silence that filled the space louder than anything. I looked at Caleb and smiled. "Thank you for telling the truth, buddy." He beamed. I turned to the others. "I never said anything because no one ever asked. No one ever wanted to ask." There it was, the truth, delivered calmly like a landing. I could see them trying to remember. Had I ever told them? Did I hide this life on purpose? But it didn't matter because even if I had, they never would have believed it. I was Anna, the weird one, the quiet one. The girl who moved away to find herself. They'd always written me off before giving me a page. What stunned me most wasn't the silence. It was a subtle shift in their eyes. The way my aunt started blinking more. The way my cousin suddenly looked embarrassed. The way Ryan, who hadn't spoken more than 2 words to me in years, now seemed genuinely curious. "So you really fly all over the world?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Last week I was in Tokyo. Before that, Milan, alone," someone murmured. I shrugged. "With my co-pilot." "Yes." Kali still hadn't said anything. She kept drinking from her wine glass like it held an exit. "You always made fun of me for not having a family," I said softly, not accusing, just stating. But this is what I built instead. It wasn't to shame her. It was to remind myself that I hadn't just run away. I had risen, quietly, out of sight, like an airplane that vanishes into clouds before you realize it's already far above you. They didn't clap. No one cheered. It wasn't a movie. It was just the quiet collapse of a narrative they had clung to for too long. Later, after the party, I went to the bathroom and washed my hands slowly. I looked in the mirror, not fixing anything, not adjusting, just seeing myself. For once, I didn't look like the outsider. I looked like the truth. When I stepped out of that bathroom, the world hadn't ended. The house was still standing, the plates were still clinking in the kitchen. Caleb was laughing with one of the cousins, oblivious to the subtle detonation he had just triggered. But everything had changed, not out loud, not in a cinematic explosion, but quietly, the way snow builds on a roof until one more flake makes it collapse. People couldn't look at me the same anymore. I wasn't sure they even wanted to, and that was the most jarring part. I hadn't meant to reveal anything. I wasn't trying to prove a point. I hadn't walked into my sister's house with some master plan to flex my job title or humiliate her in front of her friends. I just wanted to attend my nephew's birthday and maybe, for once, be treated like a normal human being, not some family footnote they dust off when they need an ego boost. But now the air around me had become too sterile, too careful. Conversations shifted awkwardly when I walked past. A few of the older relatives tried to be overly polite, suddenly curious about my little job. My Aunt Helena asked if I had ever met any celebrities while flying, and my cousin Jenna kept repeating how she always knew I'd do something interesting one day. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. What none of them understood was that I hadn't hidden my life out of shame. I had hidden it because their approval was never the fuel that got me off the ground still. There was one person who hadn't spoken a word since the reveal. Collie, she sat on the back porch, wine glass clutched tight in her hand like a lifeline. Her back was straight, but her shoulders trembled just enough for me to notice from the doorway. I watched her stare blankly into the trees. I thought about leaving without another word. But something pulled me toward her, not kindness, not pity, just a need for something to end cleanly. I walked out and sat beside her. "You could have told me," she said. Finally, I didn't answer. Because we both knew that wasn't true. She turned to me. Her face wasn't angry. It was cracked in a way I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. Before she learned how to armor herself in performative perfection. "You flew jets this whole time? For real?" I nodded. "For how long?" "6 years," she swallowed. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I looked at her and said the truth, flat and gentle. "You never asked," and she didn't, not once. Not when I left for aviation school. Not when I missed holidays because I was flying over oceans. Not when I got my commercial license and started training with corporate firms. She was too busy living the life they praised. The one with PTA meetings and themed birthday parties and casserole competitions at church. I had chosen something else, not better, just different. But in this family, different was always translated as less. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you, Collie," I added. She flinched, but kept her voice steady. "But you did," I sighed. "No, Caleb did, I just confirmed it." That truth landed harder than I expected. She finished her wine in a single gulp and stood. "You know, they always compared us. But it was never fair. You got to disappear and become this impressive person. I stayed, I carried the weight, I stood to. And you got applause for every step." I got silence. She didn't answer that because she couldn't. And honestly, that was enough for me. As I walked to the front of the house, ready to leave, Caleb ran up and hugged my legs. "Next time, can I go in your airplane?" I smiled. "Maybe. Mom said I can't." I crouched to his level. "Listen to your mom. But maybe when you're older, okay?" He nodded solemnly. "You're the coolest in the whole family." That hit me because I didn't need to be the coolest. I didn't need to be envied. I just needed to know that someone, even a child, saw me clearly, without the layers of resentment and expectation and decades of being underestimated. When I got in my car, I looked in the mirror again. Same face, same skin, same quiet resolve. But now, I wasn't just the weird aunt who lived far away. Now they knew, and sometimes, knowing is all it takes to shift power. I didn't go back home immediately. I parked outside the airport where my car was stored, reclined the seat, and just stared out the windshield as planes came and went, each one slicing through the sky like it belonged there. I'd seen that view 100 times, 1,000, but that day, it felt different. It felt earned. Not just as a pilot, but as a woman who finally stopped apologizing for how high she had flown. Because the truth is, no one in my family ever asked what my life was like. Not really. They assumed, they guessed, they made up stories to feel better about what they didn't understand. She travels too much to have a real life. She's probably lonely. She probably regrets not having a husband. And my favorite, she probably made all that up for attention. As if I needed to invent a life, when the one I was living was already beyond what any of them imagined for me. I remember one time, a year ago, when I flew a CEO and his daughter across the country for a medical emergency. She was only 11, and had collapsed during a skiing trip. Every commercial flight was booked or too late. So he chartered us. I flew through a storm, slept on the floor of a hospital waiting room after landing, then flew him back the next morning. No one in my family knows that story. They were too busy arguing on Facebook about what brand of bottled water was ethically sourced. They didn't want to know who I was, because the real me didn't fit in their world of casseroles, gossip and petty validation. So I never told them. I kept my photos for myself. The view over Iceland's glacial caps at dawn, the sun setting behind the Andes. The storm I outran over the Pacific that made the cabin crew cry but left my hands steady on the yoke. I kept the late-night messages from grateful passengers, the holiday layovers in airports while families ate together without me, the quiet pride of landing a jet so smoothly that no one even clapped, because they didn't realize we already touched the ground. I kept it all to myself, because the version of me that mattered, the one who could fly, lead, adapt, survive, didn't exist to them until Caleb spoke. And now they were curious. Collie texted that night. No apology, just, "So? Do you like your job?" I stared at the screen. Not "I'm proud of you," not "I'm sorry for the way I treated you." Just an awkward attempt to slide into a version of my life she'd spent years mocking. I didn't answer. The next day, my mom called. I let it ring. Then my dad. I sent it to voicemail. Then my aunt. "You've got to come by sometime and show us those pictures, dear." We had no idea exactly. They had no idea. because they never wanted one. And I realized I was okay with that. I didn't need them to know. I didn't need their approval, their validation, their social media likes. I'd built a world above their heads, literally, and I didn't owe them a tour. But still, something shifted. The next time I flew out of state, I brought my camera. I took a photo from the cockpit. Soft light across the clouds, the edge of the world golden under. A fading sky dot, and I printed it. I mailed it to Kali's house with a note. You told me once I was too much for this family. Turns out, you were right. I was always meant to be more than grounded, no signature, just that. Because I didn't need to sign it. She knew. They all did, and I had finally, stopped asking for a seat at their table. The funny thing about children is that they don't need context to admire someone. They don't care about gossip or titles or whether your name has ever appeared in a family group chat is a weird one. All they care about is how you make them feel and whether you can tell a cool story. And I had plenty of those. The next time I visited, weeks after that awkward barbecue, I didn't go for anyone's approval. I didn't even bring a bottle of wine or a dessert like I usually did to earn some version of acceptance. I brought something else, a toy plane for Caleb and a fold-out map of the world. He screamed when he saw me. It's the pilot, he yelled like I was some celebrity. My sister Kali gave a stiff smile. I nodded back, polite but distant. We didn't hug. I sat cross-legged on the carpet and watched Caleb spread the map across the floor. His siblings crawled over too. Curious. Where have you been? He asked. I pointed. London, Tokyo, Dubai. A place in South Africa with a name he couldn't pronounce but tried anyway. Every country I touched became a spark in his eyes. What's it like? Flying over the ocean? Do the clouds look different in other places? Have you ever seen lightning from above? I answered everything. They asked about turbulence and thunderstorms, about how you eat when you fly, how you sleep. I told them about the time a bird hit the windshield midair, and I had to make an emergency landing. They gasped. I told them about flying into a blizzard and about a client who once forgot his passport and tried to bribe me with gold watches and how I reported him anyway for hours. I wasn't just their aunt. I was their hero. Kali sat on the sofa, mostly silent. Her husband kept checking his phone like he couldn't bear to be in the same room. But I didn't care. The shift was already happening, not with them, with the next generation, the ones who didn't carry their parents' bitterness like a family heirloom. Later that afternoon, Caleb asked if I could take him flying someday. Maybe, I said, when you're older and your mom lets you. Kali flinched at the indirect challenge. She opened her mouth to speak, maybe to change the subject or make some sarcastic remark. But nothing came out. For once she had nothing because the kids weren't listening to her anymore. They were listening to me. I stayed a little longer than planned that day. When I left, Caleb hugged me so tightly I felt my ribs shift. Don't forget about me when you're flying around, he whispered. Never, I promised. I got in my car and didn't look back. Not until I was halfway down the street and saw the kids waving from the front yard. Not Kali, not her husband, just the children. And I thought, maybe I wasn't the one who changed. Maybe I was just the one who stopped apologizing. And in doing that, I became someone worth remembering. It was a Tuesday. I had just finished a long flight from Sao Paulo to Toronto and was finally in my hotel room. Peeling off the uniform I wore like a second skin, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen expecting a routine message from dispatch, maybe a weather update, maybe one of my colleagues sending a meme in the group chat. But it was her, Kali. For a moment, I just stared. Her name lit up like an old wound that had forgotten how to bleed. I let it ring and ring. And when it stopped, it rang again. This time I answered. Hey, she said, and her voice was already different. No sarcasm, no condescension, just something flat, hollow. Hey, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I wanted to talk, just us. Silence. Then, about what? She paused. About everything. I guess I never realized you were doing so well. You always acted so quiet. And I thought you were just lost or stuck. I didn't know you were flying jets. That you were actually happy. I didn't answer right away. I let her sit in that sentence. She cleared her throat. I guess I just thought, you know, after you moved away, after you stopped coming around, that you were giving up on family. There it was. I closed my eyes. The hotel air conditioner hummed like an engine. I imagined her sitting on her couch, phone in hand, searching for a way to keep control without sounding like she was reaching. You know what hurt the most? I finally said. It wasn't the jokes. It wasn't the way you'd roll your eyes when I'd say I couldn't make it to a birthday or that I had work. It was that you assumed I was less, that you liked it that way. I never said. You didn't have to. You said it every time you introduced me like I was a side note. Every time you laughed when someone mocked me and didn't say a word to defend me. You let them think I was small. And you liked it. She was quiet. I could almost hear her swallow. She began. I didn't expect my kid to idolize you, and there it was, the truth, not regret, not love, jealousy. She hadn't called because she missed me. She called because Caleb now looked at me the way he used to look at her. Anna, she said. Softer now. Can we just start over? No. I said, calmly, because this isn't something you start over from, this is something you learn from. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. I smiled, tired. That doesn't mean you didn't. She tried to pivot. I just want us to be a family again. Family, I said. Doesn't mock you for sport. Family doesn't tell. You just shrink so someone else can feel big. You didn't lose a sister. You just lost control of the one you thought you owned. She didn't answer. I heard the shallow breath, the waiting, the reaching. I'm boarding another flight tomorrow, I added. I won't have time for calls for a while. Click. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't cry. I just looked out the window, watching the lights of the city blink like stars, somewhere, far below. People were going on with their lives, and somewhere else, a woman sat alone, realizing for the first time that not everyone you hurt waits around to be forgiven, and not everyone you lose wants to be found. It aired on a Sunday night. I didn't even know they were going to run it in prime time. I'd done the interview months before, a soft-spoken sit-down with a journalist who had flown with me once on a humanitarian mission. Curious about how a girl from nowhere ended up piloting Gulf Streams across oceans. I thought it would get buried somewhere between a local sports story and an airport maintenance update. But someone must have seen something in it, because there I was, framed in crisp HD, across living rooms, tablets, hotel lobbies, and maybe, just maybe, my sister's kitchen. The segment was titled Wings of Her Own, the pilot who took off without permission. They showed my childhood photos, pigtails, hand-me-down clothes, standing near planes at county fairs. My voice narrated over scenes of sky and runway. I was never the daughter who followed the script. I didn't marry early. I didn't settle. I didn't stay. They played clips of me walking the tarmac, suited up in navy and silver, shaking hands with CEOs, unloading supplies in a flood zone. The reporter asked about the support I got growing up, and I answered honestly, support didn't come, so I built without it. The final line of the segment. She doesn't just fly jets, she flies free. I didn't watch it live. I couldn't. I was 38,000 feet in the air, co-piloting a red-eye to Madrid. But my phone blew up the moment we landed. Messages from classmates, instructors, even people I hadn't heard from since high school. Is this really you? I'm so proud of you. You were always a quiet one, and look at you now. But the message that stood out was from a friend back home. Your sister just posted a picture of you two at your high school graduation. Caption: so proud of my little sis, always flying high. Comments are not going well. I laughed. Out loud, the kind of laugh that comes not from amusement, but from recognition. I opened the post. There it was, the grainy photo of me in a wrinkled gown, her in heels and perfect makeup. The caption reeked of retroactive affection. But the comments? They told a different story. Didn't you mock her at that barbecue? Funny. You didn't even mention her job back in that Facebook post last year when she was standing next to the jet. Respect isn't something you get to retroactively claim, Collie. And then the one that sealed it. You don't get to parade her now. She built that runway alone. She deleted the post within hours, but the screenshots were already circulating, and I didn't respond. I didn't text her. I didn't correct anyone or gloat or repost the interview with a smug caption. I just went to the hangar, checked my pre-flight list, and got back in the cockpit. Because that's the thing about flight, once you're up there above the clouds and far from noise, you don't hear whispers from the ground. You don't carry weight that doesn't belong to you, and for the first time in a long time, I felt weightless. I think back to that afternoon more often than I admit. The spilled juice, the tiny plastic fork, a child's voice, too innocent to lie and too young to understand how a single sentence can rearrange the balance of an entire room. She flies a jet. That was all it took, not a TED Talk, not a speech, not years of trying to prove I was worth something to a family who had already written their version of me. Just 5 words. From the one person in that backyard who had no agenda, no bitterness, no conditioning, and from that moment on, I stopped needing to be seen through their lens. Because truthfully, I never needed their validation, I just wanted respect, not the kind you have to beg for or force, the kind that comes quietly, inevitably, when you've done the work, when you've walked through storms no one clapped for, when you've kept going while they watched, mocked, and underestimated. They didn't know about the nights I slept in hostels just to afford my next flying lesson. They didn't see the part-time jobs, the skipped birthdays, the weight of being alone in every major decision. And they wouldn't have cared if they had, because I didn't fit the mold they worshipped: wife, mother, good girl with a smile, and no ambition that overshadowed the men. But up there in the sky, There's no mold, just movement, just precision and peace. I learned to love the silence of altitude more than the noise of expectations. After the interview aired and the story went viral, a lot of people suddenly had things to say. Old classmates started tagging me, distant relatives sent polite messages. Even my mother called. For the first time in almost a year, she didn't apologize, she just asked, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" And I replied with no malice, "Because you never really asked." There's a difference between being interested and being invested. My family was never invested. They just wanted a version of me that fit the photo albums, not the one that took up space. So I stopped offering pieces of myself that were never going to be honored. Today, I fly for a living. I cross continents while most of them stay parked in the same conversations, the same judgments, the same barbecue tables, where someone always has to be the punchline. But I'm not at those tables anymore. I host my own now. My terrace, the one in the city they laughed at, is open to friends, to the curious, to women who were told they were too much and not enough at the same time. We share food, stories, wine, we laugh loud. We don't ask anyone to dim themselves to be loved, and every time a plane passes overhead, someone always looks up. Sometimes I just smile and say, that could be me. Because sometimes it is. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it, echoing from that backyard, not the joke they tried to make of me, but the voice of a child, telling the truth. She flies a jet, and I always will.